Moby-Dick by Herman Melville. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. There now is your insular city of the Manhattoes, belted round by wharves as Indian isles by coral reefs. Commerce surrounds it with her surf. Right and left, the streets take you waterward. Look at the crowds of water-gazers there. Now, why is almost every robust, healthy boy with a robust, healthy soul in him at some time or other crazy to go to sea? Why did the old Persians hold the sea holy? Surely all this is not without meaning. And still deeper is the meaning of that story of Narcissus, who, because he could not grasp the tormenting, mild image he saw in the fountain, plunged into it and was drowned. But that same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans. It is the image of the ungraspable phantom of life, and this is the key to it all. Now, when I say that I am in the habit of going to sea whenever I begin to grow hazy about the eyes and begin to be overconscious of my lungs, I do not mean to have it inferred that I ever go to sea as a passenger. No, I never go as a passenger. No, when I go to sea, I go as a simple sailor, right before the mast, plumb down into the forecastle, aloft there to the royal masthead. True, they rather order me about some, and make me jump from spar to spar like a grasshopper in a May meadow. But what of it, if some old hunks of a sea captain orders me to get a broom and sweep down the decks? What does that indignity amount to, weighed, I mean, in the scales of the New Testament? Who ain't a slave? Tell me that. Again, I always go to sea as a sailor, because they make a point of paying me for my trouble, whereas they never pay passengers a single penny that I ever heard of. Finally, I always go to sea as a sailor because of the wholesome exercise and pure air of the forecastle deck. But wherefore it was that after having repeatedly smelt the sea as a merchant sailor, I should now take it into my head to go on a whaling voyage. This, the invisible police officer of the fates, who has the constant surveillance of me, and secretly dogs me, and influences me in some unaccountable way. He can better answer than anyone else. Chief among my conscious motives was the overwhelming idea of the great whale himself. Such a portentous and mysterious monster roused all my curiosity. Then the wild and distant seas where he rolled his island bulk, the undeliverable, nameless perils of the whale, these, with all the attending marvels of 1,000 Patagonian sights and sounds, helped to sway me to my wish. By reason of these things, then, the whaling voyage was welcome. The great floodgates of the wonder world swung open, and there floated into my inmost soul endless processions of the whale, and, mid most of them all, one grand hooded phantom, like a snow hill in the air. I stuffed a shirt or two into my old carpet bag, tucked it under my arm, and started for Cape Horn in the Pacific. Quitting the good city of Old Manhattan, I duly arrived in New Bedford. It was on a Saturday night in December. Much was I disappointed upon learning that the little packet for Nantucket had already sailed, and that no way of reaching that place would offer till the following Monday. As most young candidates for the pains and penalties of whaling stop at this same New Bedford, thence to embark on their voyage, it may as well be related that I, for one, had no idea of doing so, for my mind was made up to sail in none other than a Nantucket craft, because there was a fine, boisterous something about everything connected with that famous old island, which amazingly pleased me. Now, having a night, a day, and still another night following before me in New Bedford ere I could embark for my destined port, it became a matter of concernment where I was to eat and sleep meanwhile. By instinct I followed the streets that took me waterward, for there doubtless were the cheapest, if not the cheeriest inns. Moving on, I at last came to a dim sort of light not far from the docks, and heard a forlorn creaking in the air, and looking up, saw a swinging sign over the door with a white painting upon it, faintly representing a tall, straight jet of misty spray, and these words underneath: "The Spouter Inn, Peter Coffin." Coffin? Spouter? Rather ominous in that particular connection, thought I. But it is a common name in Nantucket, they say, and I suppose this Peter here is an emigrant from there. It was a queer sort of place. A gable-ended old house, one side palsied, as it were, leaning over sadly. It stood on a sharp, bleak corner. But no more of this blubbering now. We're going a-whaling, and there is plenty of that yet to come. Entering that gable-ended Spouter Inn, you found yourself in a wide, low, straggling entry with old-fashioned wainscots, reminding one of the bulwarks of some condemned old craft. The opposite wall of this entry was hung all over with a heathenish array of monstrous clubs and spears. You shuddered as you gazed, and wondered what monstrous cannibal and savage could ever have gone a death-harvesting with such hacking, horrifying implements. Mixed with these were rusty old whaling lances and harpoons, all broken and deformed. Crossing this dusky entry and on through yon low-arched way, cut through what in old times must have been a great central chimney with fireplaces all round, you enter the public room. Projecting from the further angle of the room stands a dark-looking den, the bar, a rude attempt at a right whale's head. Upon entering the place, I found a number of young seamen gathered about a table, examining by a dim light diverse specimens of scrimshander. I sought the landlord, and telling him I desired to be accommodated with a room, received for answer that his house was full, not a bed unoccupied. "But avast," he added, tapping his forehead, "you ain't no objections to sharing a harpooneer's blanket, have ye? I suppose you're going a-whaling, so you better get used to that sort of thing." I told him that I never liked to sleep two in a bed, but if the harpooneer was not decidedly objectionable, why, rather than wander further about a strange town on so bitter a night, I would put up with the half of any decent man's blanket. "I thought so. All right, take a seat. Supper? You want supper? Supper'll be ready directly." I sat down on an old wooden settle, carved all over like a bench on the battery, and waited. Supper over, the company went back to the bar-room, where, knowing not what else to do with myself, I resolved to spend the rest of the evening as a looker-on. No man prefers to sleep two in a bed. In fact, you would a good deal rather not sleep with your own brother. I don't know how it is, but people like to be private when they are sleeping. And the more I pondered over this harpooneer, the more I abominated the thought of sleeping with him. The devil fetch that harpooneer, thought I. But stop, couldn't I steal a march on him? Bolt his door inside and jump into his bed, not to be wakened by the most violent knockings? It seemed no bad idea, but upon second thoughts I dismissed it. For who could tell but what the next morning, so soon as I popped out of the room, the harpooneer might be standing in the entry, all ready to knock me down. "Landlord," said I, "what sort of chap is he? Does he always keep such late hours?" It was now hard upon 12 o'clock. The landlord chuckled again, with his lean chuckle, and seemed to be mightily tickled at something beyond my comprehension. "No," he answered. "Generally he's an early bird, but tonight he went out a-peddling, you see, and maybe he can't sell his head." Can't sell his head? What sort of bamboozingly story is this? Getting into a towering rage. "Do you pretend to say, landlord, that this harpooneer is actually engaged this blessed Saturday night, or rather Sunday morning, in peddling his head around this town?" "That's precisely it," said the landlord. "And I told him he couldn't sell it here. The market's overstocked." "With what?" shouted I. "With heads, to be sure. Ain't there too many heads in the world?" "I tell you what it is, landlord," said I quite calmly. "You'd better stop spinning that yarn to me. I'm not green." "Maybe not," taking out a stick and whittling a toothpick. "But I rather guess you'll be done brown if that 'ere harpooneer hears you a-slandering his head." "I'll break it for him," said I, now flying into a passion again at this unaccountable farrago of the landlord's. "It's broke already," said he. "Broke?" said I. "Broke, do you mean?" "Sartain, and that's the very reason he can't sell it, I guess." "Landlord," said I, going up to him as cool as Mount Hecla in a snowstorm. "Landlord, stop whittling. You and I must understand one another, and that too without delay." "Be easy, be easy. This here harpooneer I've been telling you of has just arrived from the South Seas, where he bought up a lot of bombed New Zealand heads, great curios, you know. And he sold all of 'em but one, and that one he's trying to sell tonight, 'cause tomorrow's Sunday, and it would not do to be selling human heads about the streets when folks is going to churches." "Depend upon it, landlord, that harpooneer is a dangerous man." "He pays regular," was the rejoinder. "But come, it's getting dreadful late.
You would better be turning flukes. It's a nice bed. Sal and me slept in that here bed the night we was spliced. There's plenty of room for two to kick about in that bed. It's an almighty big bed, that."
I considered the matter a moment, and then upstairs we went, and I was ushered into a small room, cold as a clam, and furnished, sure enough, with a prodigious bed, almost big enough indeed for any 4 harpooneers to sleep abreast.
"There," said the landlord,
and I turned round from eyeing the bed, but he had disappeared. I sat down on the side of the bed and commenced thinking about this head-peddling harpooneer. After thinking some time on the bedside, I made no more ado, but jumped out of my monkey jacket, coat, pantaloons, and boots, and then blowing out the light, tumbled into bed, commended myself to the care of heaven. At last I slid off into a light doze, when I heard a heavy footfall in the passage, and saw a glimmer of light come into the room from under the door. Lord save me, thinks I, that must be the harpooneer, the infernal head-peddler. But I lay perfectly still and resolved not to say a word till spoken to. Holding a light in one hand and that identical New Zealand head in the other, the stranger entered the room and began working away at the knotted cords of a large bag secreted in the room away from my previous gaze. I was all eagerness to see his face, but he kept it averted. Suddenly, however, he turned round, when, good heavens, what a sight! Such a face! It was of a dark purplish-yellow color, here and there stuck over with large blackish-looking squares. Yes, it's just as I thought. He's a terrible bedfellow. He's been in a fight. Now, while these ideas were passing through me like lightning, this harpooneer never noticed me at all. But after some difficulty, having opened his bag, he commenced fumbling in it, and presently pulled out a sort of tomahawk, and a sealskin wallet with the hair on. Placing these on an old chest in the middle of the room, he then took the New Zealand head, ghastly thing enough, and crammed it down into his bag. He now took off his hat, when I came nigh singing out with fresh surprise. His bald, purplish head now looked for all the world like a mildewed skull. Had not the stranger stood between me and the door, I would have bolted out of it quicker than ever I bolted a dinner. Meanwhile, he continued the business of undressing, and at last showed his chest and arms. As I live, these covered parts of him were checkered with the same squares as his face. It was now quite plain that he must be some abominable savage. But there was no time for shuddering, for now the savage went about something that completely fascinated my attention, and convinced me that he must indeed be a heathen. Going to his heavy wrapple, which he had previously hung on a chair, he fumbled in the pockets, and produced at length a curious little deformed image with a hunch on its back, and exactly the color of a 3-days-old Congo baby. Remembering the embalmed head, at first I almost thought that this black mannequin was a real baby, preserved in some similar manner. But seeing that it was not at all limber, and that it glistened a good deal like polished ebony, I concluded that it must be nothing but a wooden idol, which indeed it proved to be. For now the savage goes up to the empty fireplace, and removing the papered fireboard, sets up this little hunchbacked image like a tenpin between the andirons, and begins a savage rite with a ship's biscuit and a small fire. I thought it was high time, now or never, before the light was put out, to break the spell in which I had so long been bound. But the interval I spent in deliberating what to say was a fatal one. Taking up his tomahawk from the table, he examined the head of it for an instant, and then holding it to the light, with his mouth at the handle, he puffed out great clouds of tobacco smoke. The next moment the light was extinguished, and this wild cannibal, tomahawk between his teeth, sprang into bed with me. I sang out. I could not help it now, and giving a sudden grunt of astonishment, he began feeling me. Stammering out something, I knew not what, I rolled away from him against the wall, and then conjured him to keep quiet and let me light the lamp again. But his guttural responses satisfied me at once that he but ill comprehended my meaning.
"Holy devil, you," he at last said. "You no speaky. Damn me, I kill ye."
And so saying, the lighted tomahawk began flourishing about me in the dark. "Landlord, for God's sake! Peter Coffin!" shouted I. "Landlord! Watch! Coffin! Angel, save me!"
"Don't be afraid now," said the landlord, coming into my room. "Queequeg here wouldn't harm a hair of your head."
"Stop your grinning!" shouted I. "And why didn't you tell me that infernal harpooneer was a cannibal?"